Afternoon, Donny Walker. How's it going out there? Hopefully everyone's having a good week. Nice day here today. A little windy, a little cooler today. Yesterday was about 30 degrees. A little too much for me. I like around the 22 to 23 degrees Celsius. I had a fella message me from on the internet, watches my YouTube stuff, about his L65 or Model 77, Husky, old style round ones. Good old saws, they run forever. Some of them had points and condenser, the early ones, and they came out with solid state ignition, which helped out a lot. He's having a little problems with his carburetor, so I just want to do a quick rundown on a Tillotson carburetor again. I've had a video out there that I showed, I think, on rebuilding one, but I'm just going to go through some general stuff. Tillotson HS. This is a basic one off a 288. Pretty much used on all old model Huskies, Stills, Poulans, you name it, man. Everyone used them. Just a great series carburetor. Very simple. Only really issue you ever have with these are leaking metering needles, main needle leaks. It could be the seat's dirty, or the seat's wore, or a needle is wore or dirty, or varnish in there. So first thing I do when I check carburetors is I'll take the fuel filter off the fuel line in the tank, put a fitting in the hose and a fitting to my pump. Pump it up about 8 to 10 pounds. Should hold pressure, kind of pull on the line a bit in case there's a little hole in it, and then you can, might open up and it might leak. If it's not leaking there, then your fuel line from your gas tank to your carburetor is in okay shape. If it does leak and you take the fuel line out and it's got no holes in it, then your carburetor needle could be leaking. So take your carburetor off and then put the pump line directly to the carburetor to where the gas goes into the fitting here. Not the pulse hole line if there is one, but this is an internal pulse hole versus the exterior pulse hole that would be on top of the fuel pump plate, like on some models of John threads and all different types of saws. Now pump it up. Oh, see that needle? The needle in the dial here is leaking. So this carburetor is leaking. First thing you can do is spray some penetrating oil around it. Make sure it's not your gasket around your fuel pump diaphragm plate, or even the fitting for the fuel line. Sometimes someone might damage one of those, could have a plastic one with a crack in it, or it's just not sealing in there right. So check that stuff out, spray it, no leaks there. Then you're gonna go to your metering diaphragm side and look for the needle leaking there. It's pretty simple. These carburetors are really basic. Let me get you down here so you can see it. I'm gonna put it on some white paper here so you can actually see what I'm doing with it. You have, a low speed, a high speed, and an idle. That's all you got. They're real basic. So let me just show you how it operates here. So this one having the internal pulse. When you're cranking the motor over, the pulsation, the vacuum is making that diaphragm work, the fuel pump side, pulling your fuel from your gas tank to your metering chamber. Once the fuel's there, on choke, when you have it on choke, it'll feed out of the idle hole and it'll start up on choke. Once it fires on choke, you take your idle off or choke off. It'll be on a fast idle, then it'll start up on a fast idle. Let it warm up a bit and you can click it on to regular idle. But if it ain't running right and that needle's leaking like that, or we think it's a needle, let's get it apart. I've taken the 4 screws off the metering side. The metering side is the one with the 2 adjusters, low, high speed. Give it a little tap, take it off. Have a look at which way your diaphragms are on. On the metering side, it's always the gasket first, then the metering diaphragm. And yes, you got to hook it into the metering lever here. So once we get that off, we're going to put our pump back on and retest this and see if this needle's leaking. Go Got the pump hook back up. Gonna pump it up. Still leaking. And see the bubbles around that needle? Okay. So there's a few different ways you can fix this. First of all, you should take both sides of the carburetor off. Make sure your fuel pump diaphragm's in good shape and the screen isn't full of debris. I've already this one apart. It's all clean on that side. So the needle's leaking. So let's first make sure that it's put together right. The spring under the fulcrum arm, I call it fulcrum arm, or a metering lever. So the spring's intact. The metering lever or fulcrum arm is at the right setting, right height. Should be level with the inner body. Okay, inner body of there, not the gasket surface, the inner body. Pretty much all Tillotsons are always been set that way. I've always set them that way, and they work right. So our lever looks like it's adjusted at the right height. Spring's there, but it still leaks. Sometimes people will use a new needle and it still doesn't hold, because sometimes the old needles form to the seat, and that's why it was sort of seating but not right. So visual inspection of this needle, I'm looking up top of it where the metering diaphragm, or it hooks into the fulcrum arm, I should say, the metering lever. It doesn't look wore, it looks in good shape. Looking at the tip of the needle, no grooves in it, no heavy debris. Okay. And also checking the metering lever, make sure it's not all wore out on the one end where it fits on the needle, or the top where the metering diaphragm goes. This one's in good shape. If it is, replace it. The spring, make sure you got the proper spring, or, you know, sometimes with older carburetors, I'll give the spring a little tension, you know, stretch it a tad, just to make it a little stronger in there, because it gets weak after a lot of years. Okay, so inside here, you do not have a removable seat on almost all SAW carburetors. Only ones that had like metal seats in them were some 394 ones that would move and give you problems. But all these old Tillotsons, it's all cast into the casting to the carburetor. So you could clean that with brake clean, blow it out, and then try it again to see if it'll hold pressure. If it doesn't still hold pressure, what I do sometimes on older carburetors, I'll take a Q-tip. I don't have one here to show you. You know what they are. You clean your ears with them. So if you don't hear me, clean your ears out with a Q-tip. Take a Q-tip and put it in your battery drill. Put a little toothpaste on the end. I like using Crest. I don't know why. Crest toothpaste on the end, and kind of make the Q-tip a little smaller. Just work it in your hands and put the toothpaste on and go in and out of that hole. So what you're trying to do is the abrasion of the toothpaste will actually be like lapping compound, okay? So you're in and out of there with that Q-tip, and you're cleaning that seat in case there was some varnish or some green stuff in there. Clean it out really good. Have your fuel pump side off too, so you can clear right through that hole. Clean it with brake clean, clean it right out good. Then put it back together and see if it'll stop leaking. If it stops leaking, bonus. If it doesn't, what I do sometimes, once I've done all that, is I'll just put a little bit of lubricant, like penetrating oil or something on the tip of the needle into the seat area, and I'll just hold it down with a screwdriver for a while. Just kind of work it back and forth, side by side, side to side, back and forth. And sometimes that rubber will form itself into that seat and seal again. Sometimes you can get lucky, sometimes you can't. If you can't, then pretty much your carburetor's junk. There's no other way around it. Some people have taken hard needles and pounded it into the seat to try to form the seat again. Sometimes that worked years ago, but very rarely, 1 out of 4 maybe. Okay, so I've worked that in there like that. Now I'm going to assemble it again and try it again. So spring first, Get down into your little hole of the carburetor here. I have the pin through the metering lever, the needle back on. And just make sure that the spring gets under properly of the metering lever. I've done thousands of these. I'm pretty good at doing them. Okay, get that down. Tighten your screw. Once again, look to make sure the spring is in there right. Yes, it is. Work the needle or lever a couple times. Make sure it's all moving good. Yep, it's okay. Now let's put our tester back on. A little bit of fluid on top of the needle, just some penetrating oil or gas. And just pump it up slowly. Work it a little bit with that lubricant and pump it up slowly. Wow, that actually fixed it. So I got lucky on this one. Sometimes you don't. Check it a couple times just to make sure. No bubbling, it's working good. So I got lucky with this one. Not always you do. Once you've got that fixed, or if you can't fix it, yes, get a new carburetor. Put your carburetor back together. This carburetor has a this brass plug on the side by where the choke lever goes on. And that brass plug is a governor. On 288s, 2100s, some old 65s, a bunch of different models of Husky, they had this system. It's right here, this brass plug there. Take a straight blade, you can take it out. You can put a little piece of rubber in there, screw it back in. Now you don't have any governor. But you got to adjust your carburetor properly. Don't have it too lean, you don't want it too rich. I put my diaphragm, my gasket on, then my metering diaphragm back there. Now the screw's back on the cover. Then I'm going to simply set this carburetor at kind of a common adjustment, which has pretty much been the same I've used for over 40 years. This basic Tillotson carburetor is always used on the low speed setting. Turn the low speed needle in till it just touches. Don't do it too hard to wreck the seat or break the needle. It's just a fine little carburetor for a chainsaw. So put your flat blade in your L screw, which is the low. Always one closest to the engine, by the way. Think about it. Low speeds first, then high speed. Turn it until it touches. Back it off half. 1, 1.5. That's where I've always started on them. High speed. Turn it in, half. Okay, it's turned until it's seated. Now I'm going to turn it out half, 1. That's where I'm going to start with that one. And obviously your idle, I'm going to set it. This one's an external idle. Some of the older carburetors like you might have when you're 65 have the idle screw right on the carburetor. So just turn it so the thing idles, so when you start it up, it does idle and the chain's not turning. Hit the throttle. If it dies out and won't pick up, then you need a little bit more low. But normally you don't. Normally that setting is right. If you need to go more in that, there could be something else wrong with your saw. An air leak, a gasket leak, you might not have fixed that hole in that fuel line we just talked about when you pressurize it. It could be a number of different things. You could have a real warped piston on a piston port engine, and it's just kind of flooding out, so you'd be opposite. You'd be turning the low in probably with that. So anyways, that's your initial settings. Make sure it's idling, hit the throttle. If it responds good, bonus. And it comes down to an idle good, right on. So then you want to pin it full throttle and make sure you can hear that four-stroking rich sound on a carburetor that doesn't have a rev limiter, right? You'll have a rev limiter ignition or a governor in the carburetor like this one does. 2100s, 288s, lots of different models I've told you before. Oh yeah, hey Gordy, I'm wearing the West Coast Saw shirt. Pulled it off the rack here yesterday. I had a white shirt on and I got so dirty, a Husqvarna shirt, that it made me look super fat because all you could see was the dirt on my belly. I'm working on that, by the way, too. So I put your black shirt on and it doesn't look as fat. Okay, so yeah, the high speed. Turn that high speed, leave it at 1. If you don't hear it four-stroking or running rich, turn it out some more until you hear that. right? Check your RPM. You know, a lot of times I never used tach years ago. You know, today I use tachs with these governed ignitions and governed carburetors and whatnot, just because I can pretty much, the ones with auto tune and Mtronic, well, it doesn't matter because you can't change it anyways. But old school stuff, I've always kind of done it by ear. I got a super good ear. I can hear a saw running from across the shop that the guys are working on, and I know pretty much exactly what's wrong with it right then. So out to it 4 strokes with the bar and chain on. Turn it into it sounds nice, just past that 4-stroking sound or a rich sound. No more than that, it'll run too lean. You know, and then once you get it set, away you go. If you are running something with an older carburetor, it doesn't have a carburetor compensator, you want to make sure that when your air filter's getting plugged up, that you don't sit there and turn the high speed into allow for that. Stop and clean your air filter. So many fallers and loggers out there years ago would their air filter would be plugged. They didn't care. They turned their high speed in to get more RPM. Boom, they blow the saw up. Then they came out with carburetor compensators like on Stills and some Huskies, and that solved a lot of the problem too. But it really, in a way, it really didn't. Sure, it doesn't. You can still run it almost with a plugged air filter, but you know, guys would still lean it out too much, and now it won't rev anymore, but it runs too lean. So you got to have that proper adjustment on the carburetors, like the MS461 still. A lot of guys, oh, it's not revving up. I said, yeah, it's got a governor ignition, but you know what? The thing revs up to 13.7. You don't need any more than that, you know. And you want to keep that high speed at 1.5 turns on that still 461 carburetor, 1 1/4 on the low. Set the idle, and that's pretty much the magic mark from the factory, and it works all the time, modified saw or not. If you do change the ignition on 461s to the 066 and 046 coils that didn't have the rev limiter, just know how to adjust your carburetor. Don't over rev them. You'll blow the crankshaft out of them. Seen it many a times. So I'm hoping, Chris Donish, that this helps you out with your old L65. If it doesn't, you're going to need to try to find a carburetor or try to do that fixing that I told you with the toothpaste trick with the Q-tip, or holding that needle down in that seat until it kind of forms itself. That's the best I have for you. Like I say, good old Irish carburetors, eh, old Tillotson? For us Irish out there, I'm partly Irish. Most of us are over this way, eh? So hey, the Irish keep on fighting, carburetors keep on tuning. Donny Walker, gotta go. Gotta get a 365 done here for a fellow. I'm turning into a 372. Showed you before. I take the transfer plates off, ground that center part out. Now you got a 372. Port it some, and the way it goes. Now this guy's gonna have a rocking 372 that was a stock 365. And by the way, didn't run good from the beginning. Almost 1 out of 6 Husqvarnas I take apart, X-Torque saws. Right here is your intake. You got a divider here for fresh air and fuel. This one came with this here folded over, so it's blocking like half of the fuel going into this engine. The thing ran like a bag of crap, I guarantee it. So what it does is this carburetor, you see these little side notches? That little rubber flap in the middle has got to line up with those grooves to separate your fresh air on top and your fuel in the bottom. It's got a divider in this carburetor. So these, you know, what do you call these ones again? X-Torque motors get their fresh air and their fuel. That's how the divider works. So if that thing's folded over, they don't run worth a crap. So both saws I took today apart, a 365 and 372 X-Torque, that was this problem on both of them. So the one saw I'm doing for a fella here, Kyle from Duncan. That saw, he put pipes on that muffler, and my friend Scott from work, he used to work down at a shop where this guy bought it from. It never ran right. You couldn't get it adjusted. Well, that's because. So anyone that got an X-Torque saw, or you're a dealer out there, be checking your X-Torque dividers here for the X-Torque, for the air and the scavenging and the fuel. I guarantee you've got a few out there that you keep coming in, and you guys might have been changing things on it before you looked at that or even was aware of that. And it's a warranty thing too. I've been sending them into Husqvarna every time. Keep a saw on the wood, stick in the ice, rubber on the road. Hopefully, Chris, that works for you with your L65. And anyone else out there with a Tillotson carburetor, like I say, they're very basic. Even, you know, basically putting a kit in it, new Welsh plugs after you clean out your diversion holes, you know, your low speed holes, your high speed. They pretty much work all the time. The only reason these never work is because of the flooding issue with the needle. So there you go. Check out the walkersawshop.com online store. And have a great week. See you later.